One of the easiest to set up HF wire antennas for portable operating is an end-fed half wave. However, it does present a high impedance to the transceiver, which is no good unless you have some form of transformer or antenna coupler. They're not that hard to make, but the ones you see often require either winding a ferrite toroid or a variable capacitor, which, if you don't have a deep junk box, you may not have. In this video, I'll describe an ultra-simple L-match antenna coupler that requires neither of those items. In fact, you may be able to build it without even soldering. Keep watching and I'll show you how, and give you an on-air demonstration to show how it works in practice. It's built on solderless breadboard. Not the ideal way to build an antenna coupler, but if you're just testing something or want something just to operate for a short time, then it's perfectly okay, especially if you're just using low power, like say 5 watts or less. This is the circuit. On the left is the connection to the transceiver. There is an inductor and a capacitor and the antenna, which is, I've got it written here as a half wavelength of wire, so about 20 meters long for 7 megahertz, but provided that you've got the inductor and capacitor variable, or at least with tap settings like for the inductor, you can actually operate a wide range of antennas with this setup. It doesn't have to be exactly a half wavelength. But the main thing is that you do need to vary the inductance and capacitance values for different bands, and even if you go a big frequency excursion in a single band, you may need to just peak it up. Now normally you'd use, as I've done in other videos, a variable capacitor and at least a selectable range of inductors. The variable capacitor, you can use one of those plastic transistor radio types. Not particularly good for high power. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it at all. It's okay for maybe 5 watts. And with the inductor, that can be an air round coil or something on a iron powder toroid. Not a ferrite toroid, an iron powder toroid. Ferrite toroids are good for broadband transformers, balance, those sorts of things. But if you want a particular amount of inductance, like 1 microhenry, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 microhenry, if you want it to be quite small, then an iron powder former toroid is okay. It can be either yellow or red. A very common one is the T50-2. The 50 means it's 0.5 of an inch in diameter. And there's a T68-2, which is a bit bigger, which is about 0.68 of an inch in diameter, or about 2 centimeters. Anyway, you can wind enameled copper wire, like from an old transformer, onto it, and you can have taps, or you could have several inductors on several toroids and switch them, as I've also done in other antenna couplers. As for the variable capacitor, I mentioned before, plastic type for low power, air spaced for higher power. But that is not what today's video is about. I'm going to assume you don't have either the toroid, you don't want to wind anything, and neither do you have the variable capacitor. Here's a variation that you might want to try. You don't even need to do any soldering. I'll talk about that later on. The thing about it is that all of the parts here are fixed value. But if you use combinations of them, you'll be able to get a variable value. You'll be able to get several values of both capacitance and inductance, and with any luck you'll get a happy match that is good enough for your antenna and the band you're using it on. I'll do experiments later on 40 meters, and we'll see how this works in practice. Right here, these are disc ceramic capacitors. I again wouldn't recommend using them at more than 5 watts, and they do have a bit of loss compared with an air-spaced variable capacitor. but they are cheap, readily available, and you can get them in convenient values. Here I've got a range of values. 100 picofarad is useful, so is 47, and I've also got a 27 and a 10 picofarad. I might also have 150 picofarad, but if you connect, say, 1 or 2 or 3 of these capacitors in parallel or even in series, you will get different values. For instance, if you put a 100 picofarad in parallel with a 47 picofarad, parallel capacitors add in value, and so you'll get 147. Now if you put another capacitor, if you've got a 10 picofarad, then that puts you up to 157. Or if you wanted a bit less value, then you'd take out the 47, you might put in a 27 instead, and then you are down to 137 picofarad. So you won't get every single capacitance range, but you should get them at closely spaced enough intervals to be able to match a lot of antennas with a piece of wire like 20 meters long end fed. And if you can't, well, you could try putting capacitors in series. That actually reduces the value. If you put 200 picofarads in series, then that makes 50 picofarad. Now we don't have 200 picofarad capacitors here, but if you've got, let's say, 47 picofarad and 100, then now it's a bit harder to work out the value. There are formulas, there's online calculators, but if you put 100 in series with 47, your capacitance value of the two in series will be a lot less than 47. Now if you were to put instead 247 in series, then, well, you know that the capacitance value of the two in series will be half 47, so that is 23.5. So we know that if you've got 100 picofarad in series with a 47 picofarad, then you can roughly interpolate the value. It will be somewhere between 23.5 picofarad and 47 picofarad, so it would be about 35 picofarad, just roughly. You can get a wide range of values with different combinations of series and parallel capacitance values, and you can easily connect them because we can just put them in the solderless breadboard. And if you want to put capacitor values in series, then you can use an unused connection, because if you've never used a solderless breadboard, all the strips like this are connected. There's this is a 5 strips. You know, you've got 5 connections. You might be able to see it, A, B, C, D and E. These are all connected. So if we have a close up there, we've got a lead here and then a wire there, and that's actually connected with the connections inside. Now you've also got a channel here, because these solderless breadboards are designed for integrated circuits, the dual inline type, so that this side is not connected to the other side, which is handy in this case, because there are cases where you don't want things connected. And I haven't spoken about inductors, but it's a similar principle with capacitors, except in this case, if you want to increase the inductance, then you have inductors in series rather than in parallel, like we had with the capacitors. So as far as inductors here, it's a bit like the resistor color code. These are, you might see them as RF chokes, but they are low value inductors. This one is 4.7 microhenry. You can see you might be able to see the yellow and the violet, that's 47, and there's a gold band, so you times it by 0.1. Yes, so that's 4.7 microhenry. That's a good value to use on HF. I've got some other values here. There's a 1 microhenry, a 2.2. You can have different combinations, and you would be able to get up to about 10 microhenries, which should be enough for an L-match coupler covering frequencies of like 7, maybe 14 megahertz. You may have difficulties if you're using this at say 21 or 28 megahertz. You might have to need some lower values of capacitor like 4.7 picofarad, and it might be harder to get it exact. So this thing is really intended for use on 7 megahertz, maybe 14 megahertz, but 7 megahertz is an easy band to get contacts on. It's good for portable use, and as I'll be doing later on, parks on the air. So I'll attempt to make some contacts with that. Now I should also mention, you might be able to see it, there's just a wire link here that just joins two sides together. Because if we trace the circuit, we've got an antenna socket here. I've soldered on, but there's ways around that. The green wire is the earth, and that just goes, you've got this link there that extends it, and that connects to the counterpoise that you would have at the antenna end. And then if we follow the red wire, which is the inner of the BNC, this connects up to the transceiver. We have the inductor here. The connection is broken because we're going across the central channel. Inductor in series. And then here we put various capacitors. They are across the output terminals. This one is the counterpoise, this is the antenna, the end-fed bit, 20 meters long, and then we try various combinations of capacitors and inductance until we get a low VSWR. It definitely takes a lot longer in doing this than if you've got a variable inductor or a switched inductor and a variable capacitor, but as a starting point, try and get the combination that gives you the maximum band noise on receive. That should be fairly close to what you need, and when you are close, then just try values either side. So if you're getting it to work at, say, if you've got say 127 picofarad in there, like you've got a 100 in parallel with 27, then that might be okay, might be slightly off, but just try 110, so you've got 100 in parallel with 10 picofarad for a bit less, or if that's no good, then try 100 in parallel with 47 for 147. If that's no good, then try the 100, the 27 and the 10, and you'll get 137. You should be able to get a happy spot that's reasonably good. Not necessarily 1-to-1 SWR, but even if it indicates 1.5 to 1, then that should be okay. Here's a quick drawing. I've got the transmit here on the left, the inductor, and I've got 2 capacitors here, and you plug them in and out depending on what values. And you also substitute different inductors, and hopefully you get the right combination. But that's just a wiring diagram for the breadboard. If your breadboard is bigger, then similar principles should apply. The ground of the socket from the transceiver goes to your counterpoise, and then the inner bit, the inductor there, and then the antenna. Now what about solderless? Well, if you wanted to, there's only actually 4 soldered connections here. I've got 2 on the antenna side and 2 on the transceiver side, but if you don't even want or are able to do that, then you can get something like this, which is very handy. You can get them on eBay, though the quality of them varies, but anyway, this is a BNC male to 2 connections. The red goes to the inner and the black to the outer. Anyway, if your transceiver has a BNC antenna connection, then you can just plug that in the back of the transceiver, and then you can just have a short length of wire going from the red and the black here, going into the solderless breadboard, and then to the rest of the parts. And then on the antenna side, you could just have a binding post that and have the wire twisted around, but you're probably better off to solder as much as you can. But yeah, just thought I'd mention that if you can't solder or don't want to solder, don't have a soldering iron, you can actually build this project without soldering. And if your transceiver has a SO239 connection, then you just get one of these adapters and put it on here, and then you can use that as well. Most of the connections on this board are not used, so there's plenty of room that you can put your unused capacitors and inductors. Now set up on 40 meters. First up, I'm trying 100 picofarad and 4.7 microhenry. I'll just use the SWR indicator on the FT817. As you can see, the VSWR is not perfect, not super high, but I'll just experiment with some values in the hope that I can get it a little bit better. I've just got 47 picofarad. I'll just put it across the 100. I don't know if you can see it, but just when the noise went quiet, I had the 47 in parallel with the 100. So that means that I'm adjusting the capacitance in the wrong way. So I'll try a lower value. I'll try 47, and I've got a 27 picofarad here, so that might improve it. That's just 47, which I think is too low. Now I've got 47 and 27 in parallel, which makes it 74. And that looks just right. It's calling CQ and listening.
VK3 Sierra Quebec. Yeah, g'day Peter, great to work you on your activation. Last over 5 and 858, over. Yeah, VK3YE, VK3SQ, yeah, fine thing. Interesting concept you put together. Alright, take care, thanks for being there, and 73, catch you another time.
QYE Portable, this is VK3 Juliet Tango Mike. Yeah, you're 55, 5x5 here at the moment, bit of QSB, but all good on out in the park.
VK3 Uniform Papa, signals A-OK, no problems at all. You're 5-7, well I think in that case near enough is good enough, it's sounding okay, so seems to be working, Peter. VK3 SMW.
VK1 Alpha Romeo Quebec. You're okay, Peter. VK7 Juliet Fox Delta. Launceston, Northern Tasmania. I've got you down there, Peters Park, 55906. Confirmed. VK3YE Portable, VK3 NCR. You took a dive there of your location, but my current location is probably about 30 kilometres north of Mildura on the Silver City Highway heading to Broken Hill. Broken Hill, name's Craig, Charlie Romeo Alpha India Golf, over.
A2EXA.
Roger Peter, you're also 5 and 9, I'm at VK Fox Fox 3747, and the POTA VK-4979.
Good operating session. This is just 40 meters. Just over 20 contacts in about half an hour. So the antenna coupler definitely working. With the inductor, go for 1/10 the number of meters, so that means around 2 microhenry, and I've got a 2.2 microhenry there. And for the capacitance, well, we'll try around 40 picofarad. The nearest I've got for that is the 47. If not, I could try the 27. By the way, I really don't recommend this approach. when you're going portable, just because of all the loose bits and the chance of stuff getting lost. So just made this video just to prove that you can do it, not that this is necessarily the best approach. Now I've got 2.2 microhenry and 47 picofarad on 20 meters. Not quite 1-to-1. Alright, just made a slight change. Still got the 2.2 microhenry in there, but we've got a 10 picofarad and a 27 picofarad. So we're now at 37 picofarad. And we are spot on. So the rule of thumb, approximately 40 picofarad, which is double our 20 meter wavelength, and 1/10 the inductance, so that's around 2 microhenry, is pretty good for 20 meters.
Thank you very much for the 59 from California.
You were flying with a 7 then, but there's some QRM that just fired up. VK3 Yankee Echo Portable, VK2 GJC. Thank you very much, Peter. It's very good to hear you, and I haven't spoken to you this year. This is our first contact this year.
VK3YE, VK5 PTC. I missed your name there, but I'm currently in Central Australia at a weather station called Giles Weather Station. Thanks to you.
Well, that was a contact with HB9BHU on a SOTA summit.
Yankee Echo, this is Zulu Lima 3, Mike Romeo. Yeah, VK3YE Portable Video Lima. Thanks for the 5 and 8 there, Peter. And I've got the park details there, thank you. My name here is John, Juliet Oscar Hotel November, and my signal report to you is about a 4x4, 44.
VK2, India Oscar.
CQ, parks on the air. Victor Kilo 3 Yankee Echo, VK3YE Portable, calling CQ and listening.
Whiskey Echo 6 Zulu. Okay, Roger, you are 5353 into Northern California. Okay, very good. I'm running 100 watts. Okay, 73, Peter. Good to talk to you.
Peter. I'll jump in and quickly say hello. VK5 Quebec Delta, south of Adelaide. Great signal, well over the 9. With from the wetlands, I think you said.
And 20 metres has been good as well, including a mix of local and DX stations. Mostly thanks to the Parks on the Air app. So just to conclude with this antenna coupler, a great success. There's probably small losses, and taking something like this into the field is a bit inconvenient with parts to go missing. But if you want to build a small antenna coupler that can get a wire like this, 20 metres long, on the air, on bands like 7 and 14 megahertz, then something like this is definitely worth building. So put one together yourself and let me know how you go in the comments down the bottom. More information on my antennas and getting the most with low power amateur radio appears in my various books, including Minimum QRP, Hand Carried QRP Antennas, and more hand carried QRP antennas. Check out my website VK3YE.com or search those book titles on Amazon.